My best friend's stepdad destroyed her self-worth, and I destroyed what was left. My best friend Jolene was the type to flinch whenever men raised their voices. Her stepdad had done that to her. Years of being told she was ugly and worthless, all from the age of 3. She told me this in sophomore year, crying in my bedroom after her 3rd panic attack that month. I held her while she shook and promised I'd help her heal. And I meant it. I spent months building her up, letting her borrow my clothes because she said Brandy Melville made her feel prettier. I'd walk her up to guys at parties, my hand on her lower back for support, and start conversations for her until she felt brave enough to take over. The first time she actually flirted back with someone, she grabbed my hand so tight I thought she'd break my fingers. But I was even happier than she was. So even when she flirted with my crush, I didn't care. She needed this more than I needed him. But then it happened with Dylan, then with James, then with every single guy I even looked at for more than 5 seconds. But I kept making excuses. If she needed to prove she could get any guy she wanted, even the ones I wanted, then that was part of her healing, right? But I started noticing other things too. The way she'd sit on my lap when guys were watching, like we were performing our friendship for them. And as soon as she got their attention, she'd laugh a little too loud at my mistakes. Remember when you tried to flirt with that bartender and then he told you he was gay? She'd say, and everyone would laugh, and I'd laugh too, even though my face burned. By June, I'd stopped telling her about my crushes. But we were still pretty close because she was the only person I felt like I could be my ADHD self with. So when she asked to be my +1 to my crush's pool party, I found myself saying yes. At the time, it felt like the right decision, because Jolene had spent the whole week hyping me up about my new bikini. "You look like a straight baddie," she kept saying. "Like, actually amazing. Your body is so tea." I believed her. I actually thought maybe this time I could talk to Noah without her stepping in. We were lying on the deck chairs when Noah's friend group arrived. My stomach did that stupid flutter thing it always did when I saw him. Jolene noticed and immediately sat up straighter, adjusting her bikini strap to make her girls perkier. "Here, let me help," she said loudly, reaching over to adjust my bikini straps. When they still didn't notice her, she raised her voice even louder. "There's not much to work with, but we can make it look fuller." My entire body went cold under the 100-degree sun. Noah walked over with his friends, and Jolene jumped up, waving at them. "Charlotte, was so nervous about wearing a bikini," she announced, like she was sharing some cute story. I told her nobody would notice her chest anyway. She said it with this sweet smile like she was being supportive. Some guys laughed. Noah looked uncomfortable, but he laughed too. That polite laugh people do when they don't know how else to react. I stood up to leave, my hands shaking, but Jolene grabbed my waist. "Where are you going?" "Look, Charlotte's been working out." She squeezed my side. "You can't really tell yet, but she's trying." The words kept coming. Each one felt like being held underwater. When I finally pulled away to grab my cover-up, she called after me. "Don't be embarrassed about being flat. Some guys like that. Right, guys?" I locked myself in the bathroom and stared at my reflection. My eyes were red, but I wasn't crying. I was angry. Because that's when I understood Jolene wasn't broken. She was cruel. She'd learned from her stepdad exactly how to make someone feel worthless, and she was using me to feel powerful. I knew someone had to teach her a lesson, and that someone had to be me. The next week, she wouldn't shut up about her date with Noah. Every text was about what he said, what he did, how he looked at her. He said I'm different from other girls, more genuine. She knew I'd heard him use those exact words with me at the pool party, right before she'd humiliated me. She even started wearing the perfume I'd told her Noah mentioned liking once. On Saturday morning, she came by my house to show off her outfit before the date. It was this tight red dress that low-key made her look like a hooker LOL. "I'm kind of nervous," she said, but her eyes were bright with victory. "Noah seems really into me. Like, really into me. Did I mention that he said I'm not like other girls?" I watched her blush at her own reflection in my mirror, and something cold settled in my stomach. "I made brownies," I said, just as I'd rehearsed. "Want some? For good luck?" I watched her eat one, then another, then another. "I don't want him to see me eating," she said, and I smiled. What she didn't know? Each brownie was filled with laxative dust. I knew it would take 30 minutes to kick in, and the drive there was 25. "Let me drive you," I insisted. I needed a front row seat to the show I'd set up. And a front row seat is what I got. And more. 5 minutes into the drive, Jolene shifted in her seat. She pressed her hand against her stomach and looked out the window. I gripped the steering wheel tighter and kept my eyes on the road. She turned to me and asked if we could stop at a gas station real quick. I told her we were almost there, just 15 more minutes. My hands were shaking, but I made my voice sound normal and supportive. She nodded and went back to looking out the window. I could see her fingers digging into the door handle. The brownies were working exactly like I'd planned. Part of me felt powerful watching her squirm. The other part felt sick. But I kept driving at exactly 35 miles per hour because that was the speed limit and I couldn't risk getting pulled over right now. 10 minutes in, and sweat was running down Jolene's face even though I had the AC on full blast. She grabbed the door handle with both hands and begged me to find a bathroom anywhere. Her voice was different now, higher and scared. I glanced at her and saw real panic in her eyes. For a second, I wanted to pull over at the next gas station. But then I remembered her voice at the pool party, loud and fake sweet, announcing to everyone that nobody would notice my flat chest anyway. I remembered Noah's uncomfortable laugh. I remembered every guy she'd taken from me while I smiled and pretended it was fine. So I told her we were only 10 minutes away now and she could use Noah's bathroom as soon as we got there. She made this small whimpering sound and pressed her legs together. I drove exactly the speed limit and didn't look at her again. We were 3 minutes from Noah's house when Jolene started crying. She said something was really wrong and she thought she might throw up. I opened my mouth to say something, but then the smell hit me. It was bad, really bad, and I realized what had happened. She'd already lost control in my passenger seat. My stomach did this weird flip thing, and suddenly this wasn't funny anymore. This wasn't revenge or justice or teaching her a lesson. This was me watching my former best friend crying and covered in her own mess because I'd poisoned her. But we were so close to Noah's house now, and I didn't know what else to do. Pulling over wouldn't help anything. She needed to get cleaned up, and I couldn't do that on the side of the road. So I kept driving those last 3 minutes while Jolene sobbed and the smell got worse, and I tried not to think about what I'd actually done. I pulled up to Noah's house, and Jolene was already trying to open the door before I'd even stopped the car completely. She stumbled out onto his driveway, and I saw the back of her red dress. It was completely ruined, dark and wet and awful. Noah must have heard my car because he came out the front door with this big excited smile on his face. Then he saw Jolene and his face changed in like 2 seconds flat. The smile disappeared and his eyes went wide and he just froze on his front steps. Jolene tried to stand up straight but her legs were shaking. She looked at Noah and then down at herself and started crying harder. I sat in my car with my hands still on the steering wheel watching this unfold. This was supposed to make me feel powerful. Instead, I felt like I was watching something break that I could never fix. Jolene's legs gave out and she collapsed right there on Noah's front lawn. She was still crying, but now she was also making these horrible dry heaving sounds. Noah finally unfroze and started yelling for his mom. I could hear the panic in his voice even through my closed car windows. Then Brendan came running out from inside the house. He took one look at Jolene on the ground and pulled out his phone. I watched him dial 911 and start talking fast to whoever answered. This was real now. This wasn't just Jolene being embarrassed at a party. This was ambulances and hospitals and me sitting in my car that smelled like actual hell watching the worst thing I'd ever done play out in front of me. I wanted to drive away. I wanted to rewind time and not make those brownies. But I just sat there like I was frozen, watching Jolene curl up on the grass. Noah's mom rushed out with a bunch of towels and a blanket. She wrapped the blanket around Jolene and started asking what happened in this calm mom voice. I finally made myself get out of my car. My legs felt weird and shaky. I walked over and said I didn't know. She just got sick during the drive. The lie came out of my mouth, but it sounded fake even to me. Like anyone listening would know I was lying. But Noah's mom wasn't looking at me. She was focused on Jolene, checking her forehead for fever and asking if she'd eaten anything weird. Brendan was still on the phone with 911 giving them the address. Noah just stood there staring at Jolene like he couldn't process what he was seeing. Nobody was paying attention to me at all. They were all too worried about Jolene to notice that my voice sounded wrong or that I wouldn't look anyone in the eye. The ambulance got there in 8 minutes, but it felt like forever. 2 paramedics jumped out and went straight to Jolene. They started asking her questions, but she could barely answer between the crying and the heaving. One of them asked me what she'd eaten today. My throat closed up completely. I knew exactly what she'd eaten. I'd watched her eat 3 brownies filled with enough laxative powder to do exactly this. But I just mumbled something about not knowing and pulled out my phone. I texted my mom that there was an emergency and I was at Noah's house. My hands were shaking. So bad I had to retype it twice. The paramedics loaded Jolene onto a stretcher and into the ambulance. Noah's mom said she'd follow in her car. I said I'd come too since Jolene rode with me. Nobody questioned it. Nobody suspected anything yet. I followed the ambulance to the hospital in my ruined car. The smell was so bad I had to drive with all 4 windows down even though it was hot outside. My phone started blowing up with texts. Noah asking what the hell happened. Brendan asking if Jolene was going to be okay. 3 texts from numbers I didn't recognize. Probably people who'd already heard about it somehow. I didn't answer any of them because I didn't know what to say. What was I supposed to text back? Sorry your date ended up in an ambulance, my bad. The hospital was 20 minutes away and I spent the whole drive trying to figure out what I was going to tell people. But my brain felt fuzzy and slow. I couldn't think of a single lie that would make sense. All I could think about was Jolene's face when she realized what was happening to her. At the hospital, I parked in the emergency lot and walked into the waiting room. It smelled like cleaning products and old coffee. I sat in one of those uncomfortable plastic chairs trying to make myself invisible. About 15 minutes later, Jolene's mom burst through the doors. She was screaming at the nurses to tell her what was wrong with her daughter. Her voice was so loud everyone in the waiting room turned to stare. Then she spotted me sitting there and came straight over. She demanded to know what happened. I stood up and repeated the same lie I'd told Noah's mom. Jolene just got sick in my car and I brought her straight here. Jolene's mom stared at me for a long second like she was trying to decide if she believed me. Then she turned and went to the nurse's station to get information. I sat back down and stared at the floor. My whole body felt cold even though the hospital was warm. 2 hours later, a doctor came out to the waiting room. He looked tired and serious. He said Jolene was going to be okay, but she was really dehydrated from what looked like extreme laxative overdose. Jolene's mom's face went completely white. She asked how that was possible. The doctor said someone either gave Jolene a dangerous amount of laxatives, or she took them herself. Then Jolene's mom turned and looked at me with this expression I'll never forget. It wasn't angry yet. It was confused and horrified and starting to understand. The doctor asked if Jolene had any history of eating disorders or if she might have taken something on purpose. Jolene's mom kept staring at me while she answered that no, Jolene would never do that. Her voice was quiet, but I could hear the question in it. She was starting to figure it out. And I just sat there in that plastic chair with nowhere to hide and nothing to say that would make any of this okay. I left the hospital around midnight, and the whole drive home my car smelled so bad I had to keep all the windows down, even though it was cold outside. My mom was waiting up when I pulled into the driveway and she came out onto the porch before I could even turn off the engine. She took one look at my car and told me to park it on the street instead because the smell was too strong for the garage. I grabbed my stuff and followed her inside where she stood in the kitchen with her arms crossed asking what happened. I told her Jolene got food poisoning at dinner before the date and got sick in my car on the way to the hospital. Technically, that wasn't a complete lie since she did get sick in my car. My mom seemed to believe me, but she kept staring at me like she was trying to figure out if I was telling her everything. I went upstairs and took a shower that lasted almost an hour. Then I took another one because I still felt gross. Then I took a third one and sat on the shower floor letting the hot water run over me until it started going cold. I got into bed around 2 in the morning, but I couldn't sleep because every time I closed my eyes I saw Jolene on Noah's lawn. Sunday morning I woke up to my phone buzzing nonstop on my nightstand. I picked it up and saw 47 messages from different people. My hands started shaking and I put the phone face down because I was too scared to read them. About 10 minutes later, my brother Leo knocked on my door and came in without waiting for me to answer. He sat on the edge of my bed and asked if I'd seen what people were saying. I told him no and asked what they were saying. He pulled out his phone and showed me a group chat with like 20 people in it. Brendan had sent a message asking if anyone else thought it was weird how I was acting at the hospital. Someone else said I seemed really calm for someone whose best friend just got rushed to the emergency room. Another person said they heard the doctors found something suspicious in Jolene's system. My stomach felt like it dropped through the floor. I asked Leo who was saying I did something on purpose, and he scrolled up to show me more messages. People were speculating about whether I gave Jolene something to make her sick. Someone mentioned that I drove her to Noah's house, and that seemed convenient. My hands were shaking, so bad I had to put Leo's phone down on my bed. He asked me straight up if I did anything to Jolene, and I told him no while staring at my blanket. He didn't say anything for a minute, and then he left my room and closed the door behind him. I finally opened my messages and started reading through them. Most were from people asking if Jolene was okay or what happened. But then I got to one from Noah sent at 3 in the morning. It said he needed to talk to me about something the doctors told Jolene's mom. He said they found enough laxative in her system to be really dangerous, and he was asking if I gave her something. My whole body went cold and my hands started shaking so bad I dropped my phone on the floor. He knew. Somehow Noah figured it out, or the doctors told him, or Jolene remembered the brownies. I picked up my phone and stared at his message for like 5 minutes trying to figure out what to say back. But there was nothing I could say that wouldn't make it worse, so I just left it unread. Monday morning, I walked into school and immediately felt everyone staring at me. People were whispering to each other and looking in my direction, and then looking away fast when I made eye contact. I went to my locker and someone had written something on it in permanent marker, but the janitor must have cleaned it off because there were just black smudge marks. Jolene wasn't at the school, which made sense since she was probably still in the hospital getting IV fluids. I heard 2 girls talking in the bathroom about how Jolene almost died from laxative poisoning, and one of them said she heard I was the last person to give Jolene food. At lunch, I sat at an empty table in the corner because I didn't want to deal with my usual group. Kira from my chemistry class came over and sat down across from me without asking. She looked at me for a second and then asked point blank if I poisoned Jolene. Something about how direct she was made my eyes start watering, and before I could stop myself, I was crying right there in the cafeteria. Kira handed me a napkin and waited while I tried to pull myself together. Between 3rd and 4th period, she found me again and pulled me into the bathroom. She checked all the stalls to make sure we were alone, and then told me to tell her everything. So I did. I told her about the pool party and how Jolene humiliated me in front of Noah and everyone else. I told her about the months of Jolene stealing every single guy I liked and making me feel worthless. I told her about the brownies with the laxative powder and how I knew exactly what would happen. Kira listened to the whole thing without interrupting once. When I finished, she was quiet for a minute, and then she said what Jolene did to me was really messed up, but what I did could have killed her. The words hit me hard and I felt sick. 5th period. The office called me down over the intercom and my heart started racing so fast I thought I might actually pass out. I walked down the empty hallway to the principal's office and the secretary told me to go right in. The principal was sitting behind his desk with someone else I didn't recognize who turned out to be from the district office. They asked me to sit down and started asking questions about Saturday night. I stuck to my story that Jolene just got sick, and I drove her to the hospital. The principal looked at me for a long time, and then said the hospital had reported a possible poisoning case, and they were required to investigate. He said I should probably talk to a lawyer and that my mom was called to come pick me up early. My mom showed up 20 minutes later, and we drove in complete silence for about 10 minutes. Then she pulled over into a random parking lot and turned off the car. She asked me to tell her the truth about what really happened on Saturday. I tried to hold it together, but I couldn't, and I started crying and telling her everything. About the pool party and the humiliation and the brownies and the laxatives. She just sat there, gripping the steering wheel so tight her knuckles turned white. When I finished, she didn't look at me for a while. Finally, she said we needed to call our insurance company and find a lawyer today. That night around 8, someone knocked on our front door. I heard my mom answer it and then heard another woman's voice. My mom called up the stairs for me to come down. When I got to the front door, Willow was standing on our porch. She's Jolene's older sister, and I thought she was going to start screaming at me. But instead, she just asked if she could talk to me outside. We sat on the porch steps, and she didn't say anything for like a full minute. Then she told me she knew what Jolene did to me at the pool party because Noah had told her everything. We sat there in silence for another 5 minutes, and I didn't know what to say. Then Willow stood up and walked back to her car and drove away without saying anything else. Tuesday morning, I almost didn't go to the school, but my mom said I had to face it eventually. When I walked into the cafeteria for lunch, the entire room went quiet. Jolene was standing near the lunch line looking pale and exhausted. She was talking to some of her friends, but she looked like she could barely stand up. Everyone was staring at her and then at me. I turned around and walked straight to the library and hid there for the entire lunch period. After 6th period, I was walking to my locker when Noah appeared next to me. He asked why I did it, and I tried to explain about the pool party and how Jolene made me feel. He cut me off before I could finish and said Jolene was horrible to me, and he got that. But then he said I could have killed her, and he used my actual name Charlotte when he said it. He said I could have actually killed her. Then he walked away before I could say anything back, and I just stood there in the empty hallway watching him leave. Wednesday evening, I was doing homework in my room when I heard the doorbell ring. My mom answered, and I heard a man's voice say they were with the police department and needed to ask some questions about Saturday night. My entire body went cold, and I crept to the top of the stairs to listen. My mom told them to wait while she called our lawyer, and I heard her voice shaking when she dialed. I sat on my bed with my door cracked open and listened to adult voices downstairs talking about assault charges and reckless endangerment and intentional harm. They kept saying my name like I was some criminal they were discussing on a TV show. My hands wouldn't stop shaking, so I shoved them under my legs and stared at my bedroom wall. The lawyer arrived 40 minutes later, and I heard her introduce herself as Miss Alden. She had this tired voice like she'd done this 1,000 times before. They talked for over an hour while I sat upstairs feeling like I was going to throw up. When Miss Alden finally came up to my room, she looked exactly like she sounded. This exhausted woman in a wrinkled suit carrying a heavy briefcase. She sat in my desk chair and explained that the hospital had reported a possible poisoning case, and the police were investigating. She asked if I'd given Jolene anything on Saturday, and I couldn't lie to her, so I nodded. Mrs. Alden closed her eyes for a second and then opened her briefcase. She said I could be charged with assault or reckless endangerment depending on what the investigation found. She pulled out a yellow legal pad and told me to write down everything that happened, every single detail, including what Jolene had done to me. I started writing at 8:30 and didn't finish until almost midnight. My hand cramped up and I had to stop 3 times because I was crying too hard to see the paper. Writing it all out made it feel more real somehow. Like seeing the words on paper made me understand how bad it actually was. I wrote about the pool party and the humiliation and the months of her taking every guy I liked. I wrote about the brownies and the laxative powder and watching her in my passenger seat. When I finished, Miss Alden took the pages and read them while I sat there feeling like my insides were being pulled out. She looked up at me when she was done and said we'd talk more tomorrow. Thursday morning, I walked into school and someone had spray-painted poisoner across my locker in red paint. The letters were huge and dripping, and everyone in the hallway stopped to stare at it and then at me. I stood there frozen while people whispered and pointed and took pictures with their phones. The principal came out of his office and saw it and immediately told me to come with him. He made me sit in the front office while he called my mom and said I needed to go home for the day for my safety. What he really meant was he didn't want to deal with the drama of having me there. My mom picked me up 20 minutes later and we drove home in silence. I spent the whole afternoon in my room on my laptop reading Reddit threads about revenge gone wrong. There were stories about people who'd done things way worse than me, and stories about people who'd done things way less bad and still ended up in jail. Every story made me feel sicker. I kept thinking about Jolene in the hospital hooked up to IVS and how the doctors said she could have died. My phone buzzed around 4, and it was Mrs. Alden calling. She said Jolene's mom had just filed an official police report accusing me of intentional poisoning. Her voice was serious, and she said this was really bad, and we needed to prepare for possible criminal charges. I heard my mom crying on the phone with my dad later that night. He was away for work, and she kept saying she didn't understand how her daughter could do something like this. I pressed my ear against my bedroom door and listened to her sob, and it felt like my chest was caving in. Friday morning, I got called to the school counselor's office during 2nd period. Mr. Wu was this gentle older guy with gray hair and kind eyes who asked me to sit down. He said he'd heard about what happened and wanted to know how I was doing. Something about the way he asked, so calm and genuine, made everything pour out of me. I told him about the pool party and how Jolene made me feel invisible and worthless in front of Noah and everyone else. I told him about the months of her undermining me and stealing every guy I showed interest in. I told him about the brownies and how I just wanted her to feel as humiliated as she'd made me feel. Mr. Wu listened for a full hour without interrupting once. When I finally stopped talking, he was quiet for a minute and then he said, hurt people, but that doesn't make it okay. The words hit me hard because I knew he was right. The weekend felt like torture because I was basically under house arrest while my parents figured out what to do. Leo knocked on my door Saturday afternoon with a plate of pizza rolls and tried to make me laugh by doing impressions of our weird uncle. I tried to smile, but I couldn't stop thinking about Jolene in that hospital bed. The guilt was starting to eat through my anger like acid burning through metal. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw her face in my car, crying and begging me to pull over. Monday morning, my phone buzzed with a text from Kira saying Jolene was telling people at the school that I was a psycho who tried to murder her over a guy. My defensive anger flared up immediately because she was making it sound like I was just some jealous, crazy person when she'd spent months destroying my self-esteem. But then I remembered what Kira had said in the bathroom about how I could have killed her. The anger and guilt kept fighting each other in my head, and I didn't know which one to feel. Tuesday afternoon, Mrs. Alden called and asked us to come to her office. She sat us down and said she'd met with the district attorney and they were willing to offer a deal. I could plead guilty to reckless endangerment, do community service, pay Jolene's medical bills, and attend mandatory counseling. The alternative was going to trial where I could face actual jail time if convicted of assault. My mom asked how much the medical bills were, and Mr. Alden said around $8,000. I watched my mom's face go pale. Wednesday, we went back to Mr. Alden's office to discuss the deal, and halfway through the meeting, I couldn't breathe. My chest got tight and my vision started going black around the edges, and I thought I was dying. Missy Alden got me a paper bag to breathe into while my mom rubbed my back. When I could finally talk again, Miss Alden explained that accepting the deal meant admitting I was guilty. My mom grabbed my hand and looked right at me and said, "You are guilty, honey. What Jolene did was cruel, but what you did was dangerous." Hearing my own mother say those words broke something inside me that I didn't know could break. That night, I couldn't sleep, so I got up at 2 in the morning and started writing Jolene a letter. I wrote about the pool party and how she made me feel worthless. I wrote about watching her take Noah and every other guy I'd ever liked. I wrote about feeling invisible and used. When I read it back, I realized I was still making excuses and trying to justify what I did. I tore the letter into tiny pieces and threw them in my trash can. Then I got out a fresh piece of paper and wrote just 2 sentences. I'm sorry. What I did was wrong. Wednesday morning, my phone rang and I saw it was Mr. Wu from the school. He wanted to meet with me and my parents to talk about something important. We went to his office that afternoon and he sat us down in the chairs across from his desk. He said he wanted to arrange a meeting between me and Jolene with him there to help us talk through what happened. My first thought was absolutely not. No way was I sitting in a room with her after everything. But Miss Ann Alden called my mom that night and said showing that I wanted to make things right could help my case. She said the district attorney would look at whether I seemed sorry and willing to fix what I broke. My mom told me I should do it, and I knew she was right even though my stomach felt sick thinking about it. I texted Kira that I agreed to the meeting and she came over the next day to help me figure out what to say. We sat in my room and I kept writing things down and reading them out loud. Every time I said something that blamed Jolene even a little bit, Kira made me cross it out. She kept telling me I had to own what I did first before anything else mattered. I wrote down that I was sorry, but then I added that Jolene had been cruel to me for months. Kira shook her head and said that sounded like I was making excuses. We practiced for 3 days and I felt like throwing up the whole time. Thursday night I barely slept because I kept thinking about sitting across from Jolene and having to look at her face. Friday dragged by so slowly I thought the clocks were broken. When the final bell rang, I walked to Mr. Wu's office and saw Jolene already sitting in one of the chairs. She looked smaller than I remembered, and really tired, like she hadn't been sleeping either. Our eyes met for just a second, and I saw something in her face that looked like fear. Mr. Wu gestured for me to sit in the other chair and I did, keeping my hands in my lap so nobody would see them shaking. We sat there in total silence for what felt like forever, but was probably only 2 minutes. Mr. Wu finally said I should start by saying what I wanted to say to Jolene. I took a breath that felt like it got stuck halfway down and made myself look at her. The words came out quieter than I meant them to, but I said I was sorry, and that what I did was dangerous and wrong. Jolene stared at me for a long time without saying anything, and I couldn't tell what she was thinking. Then she spoke, and her voice was shaky when she said I had humiliated her in front of Noah, and that I could have actually killed her over some guy. I wanted so badly to bring up the pool party and everything she did to me, but I heard Kira's voice in my head about owning my actions first. So I just said I know, and that she was right, and I was sorry again. That's when Jolene started crying and said she had been horrible to me at the party, and that she knew exactly what she was doing because she wanted to hurt me. She said she was jealous of me, which made no sense at all because why would Jolene ever be jealous of me? Mr. Wu asked her to explain what she meant by that. Jolene wiped her eyes and talked about how I seemed comfortable being myself even with my ADHD and how I never tried to be someone else. She said guys were actually interested in me for real before she would come in and take them. Then she said something that made my chest hurt. She said she learned from her stepdad that the best way to protect yourself is to make other people feel small first. She said she used that on me because I was safe and wouldn't fight back. The honesty of it felt like getting punched. I told Jolene about all the months I spent trying to help her heal from what her stepdad did. I told her how it felt like she was using my support to practice being cruel, and that she was doing to me what he had done to her. We were both crying now, and Mr. Wu just sat there letting us feel everything. Finally, Jolene said she didn't think we could be friends again, and I nodded because I knew she was right about that. Mr. Wu asked if we could agree on anything, and after a minute, Jolene said we both hurt each other, but what I did was more dangerous. I said yes, and that I needed to face consequences for it. Jolene said she would write a statement for the district attorney saying she believed I was really sorry. It wasn't forgiveness exactly, but it was something, and I felt grateful for it. The following week, Miss Alden called and said the plea deal was ready if I wanted to take it. I met with her and my parents, and she read through all the terms. I would plead guilty to reckless endangerment and do 200 hours of community service. I would have to pay $8,000 toward Jolene's medical bills in monthly payments and go to mandatory counseling for 6 months. My mom's face went pale when she heard the dollar amount, and my dad said they would have to take out a loan. I signed the papers and it felt like signing away a piece of my life, but I knew it was what I deserved. At the school the next week, people were still talking about what happened, but slowly the gossip started moving to other things. Some people thought I was completely crazy, and some people said Jolene deserved what she got. Most people just moved on because we were all teenagers and nobody stayed focused on anything for very long. Kira sat with me at lunch every day and walked with me between classes, and never once made me feel like I was too much drama to deal with. Having her stick by me through everything meant more than I could ever explain to her. The following Saturday, I showed up at the Riverside Community Food Bank for my first shift. The building was this old converted warehouse with metal shelves going up to the ceiling and boxes everywhere. A woman with gray hair pulled back in a tight bun looked me up and down when I walked in. She introduced herself as the coordinator and handed me a clipboard without asking why I was there or what I did. She just pointed at a pile of donation boxes and told me to sort canned goods from dry goods and stack them on the right shelves. I spent 4 hours lifting boxes and organizing food, and my back hurt by the end, but my brain felt quiet for the first time in weeks. There was something almost calm about the simple work of just putting things where they belonged. On Tuesday, I had my first appointment with Dr. Morgan. Her office was in this professional building downtown with boring beige walls and a waiting room that smelled like coffee. She was younger than I expected, maybe early 30s, with dark hair and glasses that kept sliding down her nose. She asked me to tell her what I felt right before I gave Jolene the brownies. I sat there picking at my thumbnail for a minute before I said I felt powerful for the first time in months. She wrote something in her notebook and looked up at me. She said we needed to talk about healthy power versus destructive power and what the difference was. I wanted to argue that Jolene deserved it, but I kept my mouth shut because I knew that was exactly the kind of thinking that got me here. That Thursday, I was walking to my car after school when Noah appeared next to me in the parking lot. He looked uncomfortable and kept his hands in his pockets. He said he couldn't be friends with me anymore, but he hoped I got help. I told him I understood, and that I appreciated his honesty, even though it made my chest feel tight. He nodded and walked away, and I saw Brendan across the parking lot deliberately turn and go the other direction when he noticed me. I got in my car and sat there for 10 minutes before I could make myself drive home. 2 months into community service, I was sorting donations next to this older woman with bleached blonde hair and tired eyes. She asked what I was there for, and I almost lied, but then I just told her the whole story. About Jolene and the pool party and the brownies and the hospital. She listened without interrupting, and when I finished, she was quiet for a minute. Then she said the question wasn't whether I was a bad person, but whether I was going to learn from this, or let it define me. It was the most helpful thing anyone had said to me since this whole mess started. At the school, Jolene and I started passing each other in the hallway sometimes. We'd do this weird half-nod thing that wasn't really acknowledgement but wasn't ignoring each other either. It felt strange and sad and also kind of necessary. One afternoon, Willow texted me out of nowhere to say Jolene was doing better and seeing a therapist to work through her stepdad issues. I texted back that I was glad she was getting help, and I meant it. In therapy, Dr. Morgan had me write letters to my younger self about self-worth and how it couldn't come from other people's approval or from tearing others down. The whole exercise felt super cheesy at first, and I rolled my eyes when she suggested it. But as I wrote, I started understanding how I'd let Jolene's opinion of me matter more than my own opinion of myself. How I'd given her all this power over how I felt about myself, and then got angry when she used it. 3 months into my service hours, I was restocking shelves at the food bank when a woman came in with 2 little kids to get groceries. She was filling her bags, and one of the kids asked if I worked there. The mom smiled at me and said thank you for volunteering and that people like me made a difference. My eyes got hot and I had to turn away and pretend to organize some cans because it was the first time since the incident that someone had seen me as helpful instead of destructive. The next Saturday, Leo picked me up and took me to get ice cream at this place we used to go to when we were kids. We sat outside at the metal tables and he told me he was proud of how I was handling everything. He said I messed up really bad, but I wasn't making excuses and I was doing the work. And that was what mattered. Having my brother's respect back felt like getting a small piece of myself returned. 4 months after everything happened, I was at a coffee shop doing homework when I saw Jolene walk in with a group of girls I didn't recognize. She looked healthier somehow, and she was laughing at something one of them said. Part of me felt sad about losing the friendship we used to have, but mostly I just felt relieved that we were both moving forward in our separate directions. My last session with Dr. Morgan was on a cold afternoon in early November. She asked me what I learned from everything, and I sat there thinking about how to put it into words. I told her I learned that revenge doesn't fix anything and just creates new damage. I learned that hurt people do hurt people. But that's an explanation, not an excuse for what I did. And I learned that real strength is taking responsibility for your actions instead of trying to get even. She smiled and closed her notebook and said she thought I was ready to finish therapy. Walking out of her office that day, I felt lighter somehow, like I'd been carrying something heavy and finally got permission to put it down. I finished my community service hours on a cold November morning at the food bank. The coordinator pulled me aside after I'd stacked the last box of donations and handed me an envelope. Inside was a recommendation letter for my college applications. She told me I'd shown real growth and commitment over the past months. I read it in my car and had to wipe my eyes because it felt like proof that I was more than just the girl who poisoned her friend. The letter described me as thoughtful and dedicated, and those words meant everything after months of being seen as dangerous or unstable. I drove home gripping the steering wheel tight and feeling like maybe I was actually moving forward instead of just treading water in my own guilt. The next week, Kira and I were eating lunch in the cafeteria when she mentioned something that made me stop mid-bite. She said Jolene had apologized to her for some mean comments she'd made last year about Kira's weight. Apparently, Jolene was going through her own process of making amends to people she'd hurt. I sat there holding my sandwich and thinking about how weird it was that we were both doing similar work from opposite sides of the same mess. Kira asked if I thought that meant anything, and I said I didn't know. But it felt important somehow. We were both trying to fix the damage we'd caused, and that had to count for something, even if we'd never be friends again. That night, I sat at my desk and wrote Jolene a final letter. I didn't ask for forgiveness because I didn't think I deserved it, and I wasn't sure she did either. Instead, I thanked her for being honest in the mediation, about how she'd used me to feel powerful. I told her I hoped she kept healing from what her stepdad had done to her, and that she found friends who actually built her up instead of tearing her down. I wrote that we both deserved better than what we'd done to each other. The next morning, I folded the letter into thirds and slipped it through the vents in her locker before first period. I walked away quickly because I didn't want to be there if she opened it right away. 2 days later, I was getting books from my own locker when I saw a folded piece of notebook paper taped to the inside of the door. My hands shook as I opened it and read Jolene's handwriting. The note just said thank you for the letter, and that she hoped I found people who appreciated me for who I was. The last line said we both deserved better than what we did to each other. I stood there in the empty hallway reading it 3 times and then carefully folded it and put it in my backpack. That night, I tucked it into my desk drawer as a reminder that people are way more complicated than just good or bad. My parents finally stopped looking at me like I was someone they didn't recognize anymore. My mom came into my room one evening while I was doing homework and sat on the edge of my bed. She told me she'd seen real change in me over the past months, and she was grateful I'd taken responsibility for what I did. Her voice got quiet when she said she was proud of how I'd handled the consequences. My dad came home from his work trip the following weekend and took me to dinner at this Italian place we used to go to when I was little. We talked about mistakes and growth and second chances while sharing a plate of breadsticks. He told me everyone messes up, but not everyone learns from it, and he could see I was actually learning. December arrived with snow and college application deadlines. I spent 3 nights writing and rewriting my personal essay about taking responsibility for a serious mistake and what I learned about the difference between justice and revenge. I wrote about how I'd let anger control me and how I'd confused punishment with healing. My guidance counselor read the final draft and looked up at me with this expression I couldn't quite read. She said it was the most honest essay she'd read in years, and that colleges would see the growth and accountability in every line. I submitted my applications on a Friday night, and then sat on my bed staring at my phone wondering if any school would want someone with a misdemeanor on their record. The acceptance emails started coming in March. I got into 3 colleges, including my top choice, which was this small liberal arts school 2 states away. They knew about the misdemeanor because I disclosed it in my application, but apparently my essay and recommendation letters showed enough growth and accountability that they were willing to take a chance on me. I cried happy tears for the first time in months when I read the acceptance letter. My mom found me sobbing in the kitchen and thought something terrible had happened until I showed her the email. She hugged me so tight I could barely breathe and kept saying she knew I could do it. At graduation practice in late May, Jolene and I ended up standing near each other in the alphabetical line. We did that awkward half-smile thing, and then she asked where I was going to college. I told her about the liberal arts school, and she said that sounded perfect for me. I asked about her plans, and she said she was going to a school 3 states away to study psychology. I looked at her and said that made sense, and I actually meant it as a compliment. She smiled slightly and said yeah, she had a lot to figure out about why people hurt each other and how to stop the cycle. We stood there in silence for a minute before the principal called for us to practice walking across the stage. Graduation day was hot and sunny, and my whole family showed up to watch me walk across the stage. I heard them cheering when my name was called, and I felt this weird mix of pride and sadness. 10 minutes later, I watched Jolene walk across, and her family cheered just as loud. We both made it through senior year, and we were both moving forward with our lives, just not together. Sometimes healing works that way, with people going on parallel paths instead of coming back together. I saw her at the graduation party that night across the room talking to her new friends, and I felt okay about it. We'd both survived what we did to each other, and that was enough. The summer before college, I went back to the food bank one more time, even though my required hours were finished months ago. The coordinator seemed surprised to see me and asked why I came back. I told her I wanted to help, and she smiled and said she could use someone to train the new volunteers who were starting that week. I spent the afternoon showing 2 high school students how to sort donations and stock shelves. Teaching someone else about service and accountability felt like the final step in my own growth. On my way out, the coordinator thanked me again and said I should be proud of the work I'd done. I drove home thinking about how far I'd come from the girl who put laxatives in brownies to hurt someone. I wasn't that person anymore, and maybe that was the whole point of everything that happened. 2 weeks before college, I was packing up my room when I found pieces of paper shoved in the back of my desk drawer. I pulled them out and realized it was the first letter I tried to write to Jolene months ago, the one I tore up because it was full of excuses. I smoothed out the pieces on my bed and read through them. Every sentence was about what she did to me first, how she deserved it, how I was just defending myself. I compared it to the actual letter I sent her, the short one that just said I was sorry, and what I did was wrong. The difference between the two letters showed me how far I had come from that angry girl who thought revenge would fix anything. I folded up the torn pieces and threw them away for good this time. On move-in day, Leo loaded up his car with all my boxes and bags. The drive to campus took 3 hours, and we talked the whole way about starting over and getting second chances. He told me it was cool that I could have blamed everything on Jolene being mean to me and played the victim, but I owned what I did instead. He said that took real courage. I felt proud of myself for the first time in months, not because I got away with something, but because I actually changed. When we pulled up to my dorm, Leo helped me carry everything up to the 3rd floor. My roommate was already there unpacking her stuff, and she introduced herself while Leo brought up the last box. She asked what I did over the summer, and I told her I did community service and learned a lot about being responsible for my choices. She just nodded and said that was cool, and started asking about what classes I was taking. I appreciated that she didn't ask why I had to do community service. This was my chance to be known for who I was becoming, instead of just the worst thing I ever did. During the first week of classes, I was walking through the student center when I saw a table for peer counseling training. I stopped and read the flyer about helping other students work through hard situations and make better choices. I signed up right there and went to the first meeting that Thursday. The program coordinator explained that we would learn how to listen without judging and help people think through their options before they did something they would regret. I thought about how different things might have been if I had talked to someone before I gave Jolene those brownies. What happened with her would always be part of my story, but it didn't have to be the ending. I was building something better now, one choice at a time, and maybe I could help someone else avoid making the same mistakes I did.